Well, okay. So, I mean, people are still joining, but I think we can just start right now because more people are coming later anyways. So I'm happy to have you here in this session with the topic Interest in the Good Life for the Elderly in Rural Areas. Okay, now Theresa dropped out. Let's see if she will rejoin. But you can still hear me, Sylvi, right?
I can still hear you.
Okay, perfect. Well, then welcome to you. Now I have to admit her again. So nice to have you here. I'm Isabel. I'm working for CorrelAid as the community manager, and I will be the moderator for this session. So now kind of Theresa's dropping in and out again. So maybe Sylvi, you can just briefly introduce yourself for our audience, and I will prepare something in the background. Yeah.
Yes, great. Perhaps we can also just pause one moment because I need to get the slide sharing ready, and that takes a little bit. I can't do that at the same time.
Okay, so, yeah, don't worry. Just
I can just do like a moment of.
That's all right. People are still coming, so don't worry.
Not so good at multitasking this late. Is Theresa back?
I just admitted her again. So let's see. Yeah, there she is.
I'm sorry, I was having headphone issues and I had to keep I had to leave every time I adjusted them. But
okay.
Technically are hopefully over.
So all right. Well then, welcome again to you as well.
Thanks.
So yeah, please just briefly introduce yourselves, not yet talking about the project, just about yourself for a couple of minutes, and yeah. Maybe Sylvi, you can go ahead.
I can go ahead. Yes, now I've done the slide thing. So my name is Theresa. I'm an economist, and I'm currently working as a postdoc at the Chair for Empirical Economics at the University of Potsdam. There I teach statistics, econometrics, and machine learning to students, very much hands-on. And I research how to do education in the digital era. So how to design courses so that people actually don't drop out. So it very much links education, economics, and behavioral economics. And I do that also in a very hands-on way with data coming from online learning platforms. And sometimes I also design A/B tests, if that's something that you know.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's on me.
Thank you. Theresa?
Yeah, my name is Theresa Gazinski, and I work as a data analyst at a tech company here in Berlin. I actually also have a background in nonprofit work, so I did a bit of a career pivot a few years ago, in part because I am very interested in this data science and just general data for social good movement. So I have worked in several nonprofits in the United States, where I'm from, as well as here in Germany, in Berlin. And then I've since pivoted and now work in the for-profit industry in a more data analytics role. So it's a nice, I kind of have a good understanding, I think, from both sides, from the nonprofit side as well as the data side, about the main kind of challenges that I think nonprofits are currently facing when it comes to dealing with data and how to best utilize data that's out there for their own purposes and their own kind of social spheres, I would say.
Okay, thank you so much. So I created a small poll for our audience so that we also know who's actually listening to this talk, because maybe we can put the focus more specifically. So you should all see, if you click on the poll or Umfragen, on the right side next to your window, you should see a poll. And if you could maybe just quickly answer the question, that would be great. And I share the results. So let's see what people tell us, why they are here or how they identify. Okay. Looks quite diverse. So let's see how we do that. But we have content for all these people here. So, all right. Then I would just say maybe we just start with the project presentation. You can maybe tell us about who is Denk-Mal-Kultur e.V., what kind of association, what did you do there, for how long, and yeah. So I'm very excited for your input.
Great. So the screens are there. The slides are visible, right?
Yes, they're visible.
Great. Then I'll just click on the next slide in this mode because we've prepared answers to those questions. So Denk-Mal-Kultur e.V. is, so far, it's an association that takes care of a mansion in Heinersdorf. And it's kind of like a cultural center. So they want to restore this mansion and then use it as a cultural get-together area. So they've started doing that already a little bit, but want to expand on that. And they have partnered up with a couple of people from the local politics and social workers to research in a very practical manner how you can age on the countryside. And for that, they aim at setting up a practical research center that kind of tackles this question. And with practical, they mean it's not only researching, writing reports, but actually really trying out formats and serving the community in the countryside. And so this is kind of what they are on the onset of doing and what they would like to do. And that's kind of where we came in. They approached us because I think they heard from one of the NGOs that we had previously done a project with Stiftung Bürgermut, and that's how they came in contact with us. And then they already had the idea they want to survey the relevant people who might be interested in this practical research center. And they had a couple of questions prepared, and then we kind of helped them kind of polish the survey and actually implement it online into a true questionnaire. And the impact, so this is kind of the snapshot of what we're going to talk in more depth in a couple of slides, but just as a heads up, so the impact of the survey and the little report that we wrote was that we could really identify relevant interest groups, the groups that Denk-Mal-Kultur e.V. can continue on working with. We also identified topics that are perhaps a little bit more relevant, forms of communication that are interesting for different groups of people. So those are the main content-wise impacts that we had. And so now I thought I'm going to go through a couple of things. So just to kind of dwell a little bit on what our contribution was from the CorrelAid project team. So initially, we kind of really helped improve the survey design. So Denk-Mal-Kultur e.V. already had this idea. They want to know about is there any interest in this endeavor of setting up this practical research center, finding out how to live a good life in the rural area. And basically that was their question. They had this one question. And so we kind of discussed a little bit with them what they want to do with the answers to this questionnaire, and then very soon realized that it would be good that once you do a questionnaire, you already have the people there or you have them online in a web interface. It'd be nice to know some other things about them as well to better grasp their answer to whether they're actually interested in this. And so then we kind of convinced Denk-Mal-Kultur e.V. to also ask things such as age, and gender, and a little bit on their education background, just to kind of be able to assess the answers they gave to the main questions a bit more. And so the survey was implemented on Sogo. It's one of the online survey platforms. That went rather well, even though we only had the free version, so that was okay. And in total, we had about 140 citizens and relevant stakeholders that answered this first online survey. And now I want to show the first outcomes. So this is a kind of graph that we produced in many times, again and again. In the report that we in the end gave Denk-Mal-Kultur. And so this is basically the answer to the question, how interested are you in a practical research center on aging in the countryside? And it's disaggregated by gender because that's, well, we thought it would be more meaningful if we actually show those differences, because it's something that kind of came out of the report again and again, that there are gender differences, at least in this pool of people who answered. So you can see that it's the percentage point, it's the percent distribution. And so that means all bars should add up to 100 for each gender. So it's kind of standardized. And you can see that there's a large interest. So 4 and 5 are the categories that they're interested or they're very interested. But the female tended to be a little bit, the female respondent tended to be a little bit more interested. And so that was actually a finding that kind of we saw throughout, that there is gender differences also already at this first question. All right, so with this first insights, I'm going to hand it over to Theresa, who will show some more bar charts.
Cool.
Can
you keep, or can I
yes, I can keep going. Okay. Yes, please. So I'll go to the next. Yes, that's true. So I'll go to the next. Just tell me when to.
Yeah, we'll do. So yeah, like Sylvi is starting to explain, we broke down a lot of these survey questions by a few different demographics. So the one we're showing you here is gender. And this was very useful because we saw both similarities and differences between the genders in a variety of the questions. One thing that kind of became a bit more complex when we were trying to figure out how to visualize these results was, unlike the first general question about level of interest in the topic, some of these other questions allowed you to show multiple results. So in the following two outcome examples that we're showing you now, you'll notice that when you actually look at the total percentage, it's sometimes going to be over 100% because someone can answer, I would prefer email newsletter, and I would also like a press release. So that was something that was a bit more complex, even though we were at the end of the day trying to visualize survey results, and that might seem simple for someone with a more data-heavy background. The way that the survey is designed does impact the complexity, and I think that was something that we really had to be mindful of when we were trying to showcase the results. But so the example here, if you're the perspective of the Herrenhaus from this Denk-Mal-Kultur e.V., this might be helpful for you because depending on what you're communicating, you might choose different communication methods. So I think overall, looking at the results of this survey, it's very clear that using either email newsletter or a press release would be a very effective way for you to communicate to all of the people in your community, regardless of the topic. But if you might have a topic where you know you are more interested in getting this information out to people who identify as female, you might then consider, say, an event, because if we see here, women are more interested in holding or receiving information from an event than men are, and vice versa. So I think breaking down by gender can be one way that the nonprofit, as they think about how to use these results, can be a bit more strategic in where they choose to use their resources and their time. If we go to the next example, this is another one where we see not as much differences by gender as we did maybe in the previous two graphs, but you still see some relevant gender breakdowns when we're asking about research topics, relevant research topics. Again, if you're the nonprofit, although this is a pretty busy graph and there's a lot of information to take from it, I think it's pretty clear that when you're deciding between, say, 8 or 9 different research topics, and again, this gets to like the utility of your resources, it might be best to stick with topics like medical care or mobility in the countryside, because those are things that, regardless of gender, a large percentage of people would like the resources to be dedicated towards that type of research. And again, if you are looking for maybe to target men in your community or women in your community, then you might want to look at the differences between the two genders when it comes to these questions. Again, something like cultural opportunities. so towards the bottom there, is something that women have a much greater interest in than men. So if for whatever reason you wanted to do an event that, or do some research that targeted the women in your community, then this would be an interesting takeaway for you. So those are just some examples of the ways in which we tried to visualize our results for the nonprofit. And what we also did in the report itself was we summarized a bunch of these learnings. So I think for those of us, again, who might have like more of a data science or data analytical background, something like reading a bar chart comes pretty naturally to us. And I think it's important to remember that for the nonprofits out there, there's a different skill set. And it's really important to take away your kind of learnings and findings and suggestions for next steps. And that way, the survey results are easily operationalized by the nonprofit, and they can really utilize those learnings pretty well. So those are just 3 examples of charts that we made for this report that we ended up putting together. And that kind of gets to the next slide on impact. So just kind of taking a step back, those were 3 examples, like specific examples that we put together. But overall, I think in terms of the impact that this project had for the nonprofit, it was really valuable for them to be able to really quantify the interest, both among the general population in that community, as well as relevant stakeholders, like people who identify as being part of the medical community, to kind of quantify the interest that they had in the topic as a whole, as well as start to kind of break it down into more specific subtopics. This is in part just a confidence boost for the nonprofit, so they kind of feel like that they are going in the right direction with the vision that they have for helping this community. And of course, it's also very important when it comes to fundraising opportunities. I'm sure for those who are working in the nonprofit sphere, you know that how difficult it is to kind of do fundraising, and that a constant, something you constantly have to be thinking about in many cases. And this is a great example of being able to quantify the interest that you have in your community and then prove basically your worth and prove that what you're doing is really helpful for the community and that they're interested in that work. So I think that's one of the most important kind of impacts that this report had for the nonprofit. And again, the nonprofit was working with the steering committee, and it's much easier for them now to kind of rank the activities by interest and then potential support, instead of just having one vast long list of things that they could do. This kind of helps give them a bit more, it helps them, or it allows them to make a more informed decision based on the interest of the stakeholders, the interest of the community members about where they should really put their resources and how they should best use their time. And the last kind of impact I would say is just that it really helps make sure that it's user-oriented and it's oriented on the community for all of the future activities that the foundation is going to be doing and how they're going to be spending their time, that it's not something that just is coming from them, but it's something where they've really made sure that all of the activities, all of the type of research that they do is of interest to the community, and that's ultimately going to make it the most beneficial for the community. So those were kind of the learnings that in our relationship with the nonprofit and in the work we did with the nonprofit, that was really beneficial for them. I think the last slide gets to our internal learnings from the team itself. And so for those of you who are interested in working on these types of projects, these are really helpful tips or takeaways that we kind of realized during and after the project. I think the first one that was a really cool learning for us was this ability, or we discovered a way to integrate R and Python code into one R Markdown document using a Reticulate package. For those of us, you know, Sylvi and I are perfect examples. Sylvi works more in the education sphere, academic sphere, and their R is a much more popular coding language. I work more on the business side of things, and their Python is a much more popular language at the moment. And I think when you have then a group of people coming together who have those different but complementary skill sets, it's important to find ways to easily integrate those tools together, and using this Reticulate package was a great way for us to do that as a team. And it made it a lot simpler than one of us maybe working in a language where we're not as familiar with it, or it's been a while since we've worked with it. So that was a really cool first learning from the technical side of things. Another really good learning for us was that although it was a smaller project and it only lasted about 5 months or so, and it was a small group of people, there was 3 of us that were doing more of the analytical work. So it doesn't seem like that complex of a project on its surface. We did find that because we were using these different coding languages, because we were using different operating systems on our computer, it still would have been really helpful to set up virtual environments before we started to kind of work on our different aspects of the project. This was something we realized towards the end of the project, and unfortunately it caused a few more hours of work in the long term. So I would say that anytime you start to share your work and break it up among different people, you're always going to run into these system issues, and it's really best to set up virtual environments from the start, just to make it easier when you're coming together and bringing all of your work into one place. The last learning we had was really to make sure to investigate available resources and maybe talk more openly with CorrelAid or with the nonprofit before pursuing certain project ideas. So in our case, we, of course, saw this project, we thought about the survey, and we immediately thought it would be really cool to have like a nice online interactive dashboard that members of the nonprofit could then use and really explore the results and make it a very kind of fancy interactive dashboard. And what we realized after we did a bit of work on putting together this dashboard was, unfortunately, we just didn't have the resources to actually support the project on an online or web-based platform. And so I think it's a really important tip to kind of maybe take a step back once you have these good ideas and make sure that the interest is there from the nonprofit side of things, and also that the resources are there from either CorrelAid or the nonprofit before you spend your time and invest in there, because sometimes simplest is best, and it doesn't need to be anything more than, answering the questions that, in this case, the nonprofit needed answered. So those were from the project side of things, 3 kind of important takeaways that Sylvi and I and our other teammates kind of learned through the experience. But we're happy to talk more if you guys have questions about and get into more specific details, either from our work with the nonprofit and what that relationship was like, or our work as a team and what that experience was like. So yeah, Sylvi, I don't know if you have anything to add before we turn to questions. Okay, cool.
No, let's open up the floor. Yeah, to questions. That'd be nice to hear what people think.
Yeah, so feel free to put your questions in the chat. You have the chat window and then the session, so you can directly reach us here. And also, I don't know if you're a nonprofit organization and you feel more comfortable in German, you can also ask your question in German and we quickly translate, so no worries. Well, the poll said that there are like 2 NPO people here, and then there's one question from Arndt. Can I ask about the logistics, target population? How was the survey distributed, response rate, sample size, survey software used, etc.? So that's more the technical part, but I think you're prepared for that as well. So yeah, I hand over to you. I don't know who of you wants to answer this. Sylvi?
I could do that, yes.
Okay.
So, so the logistics was, well, yeah, so this is, we got surprised by Corona or COVID-19 with this. So it was so the plan was to do online and paper. In the end, we only did online. So that means the sample of people who actually answered. So in total, there were 140 that answered. And most of these people are people who themselves could also answer an online questionnaire. So this is probably not your 85-year-old grandma living on the countryside. It's mostly people who feel comfortable answering online questionnaires. So yeah, so the plan was to also do a paper, but that was not possible during the time of the project. So that might happen sometime later still, we'll see. But like in the project report, we made very clear that this is not a representative sample. It's more, yeah, so it's very descriptive. You can't really, I mean, I guess you can infer on the people who answered, so you can say that, but you can't really infer from the online survey sample to everyone in Heinersdorf or in Märkisch Oderland, which is the county. But yeah, so we went at length a little bit in the report, contrasting the percentage points of women and men, for instance, or the percentage shares of women and men in our survey to statistics, official statistics. The same with education. So there was a huge difference in our sample to the overall education levels. And yeah, so the only thing we could do here was to make it transparent. And then also discuss a little bit what that means in terms of interpreting the results. I'm not sure, did I cover all there was several sub-questions. Because I don't think I can see can I see the?
Yeah, you should be able to see something.
Yes, I can.
Yeah? Okay.
Okay, great. Yes, I can. So, and survey survey software, it was SoGo. It was like an online, so we had one person in charge of doing the online survey, and he felt that was a good idea. And it was, you just needed to be aware that they only have 100 respondents for every survey. So we just duplicated the survey. And so it ran twice. And then you just get a spreadsheet, like a table from that.
One thing to add to what Sylvie just said, which we didn't really talk about in the presentation, was what we tried to do was also bring in statistics from I think it was the national statistics, right, that we used, but for the region of exactly, Brandenburg, yeah, and the certain Landkreise, the certain districts. And so we tried to bring that in as like supplemental information to help the nonprofit understand, exactly to your question, Arndt, about who was being represented in this survey compared to the population in the area and whose voices maybe we're missing out on. So that's something we brought in too. We didn't show that as one of the example outcomes, but that was another source of data that we decided to use beyond just the survey results themselves.
Yeah. And that's also, we also got the feedback from Denk-Mal-Kultur that they found that very useful, because that would be something that would have been so easily accessible to them, to kind of see the pyramid of like ages for their concrete district. That was quite useful.
Yeah. And I think that's something too where you have to it's a fine line between understanding what the nonprofit wants and trying to make sure you're answering the questions that they need answered, but also understanding the reasoning behind the questions they're asking, and then taking it upon yourself to maybe bring in extra information when you think it's necessary without overcomplicating. So it's kind of a constant balance between those two things.
Okay, more questions were coming in the chat. So one is the project still open? It's not, right? It's already done and the report is handed over to Denk-Mal-Kultur e.V., but new projects are always circulated with our newsletter. So just go to our website, CorrelAid.org, and subscribe to the newsletter. And then you can get all the new projects we have and we need people to apply for. And then there was one question, how many people were on the team? You said you were like 3 people and then 4 people. Okay. And the target population was the area's general population.
Perhaps we can say something about the team too, because that works really well. So at CorrelAid, we're not only data analysts, it's also people who communicate with the NGOs. So those are very important roles. And so we had one person who kind of who was in charge of that. And so he did this job very well. So he kind of sat down with the NGO and kind of tried to assess like needs and kind of tailor the questionnaire exactly to their needs. Because you can come with all these ideas of how you should design the survey, but if it doesn't match the need of the NGO, then we're not really serving them very well. And so that was kind of a non-technical role, which was very cool. So it was great to have him on the team. And then there was 3 who kind of really did the data work.
Okay.
And then also just to add to that, Sylvi, you yourself kind of functioned as our project manager of sorts. And that's also really important to have on the team, is internally to have someone dedicated and designated to kind of push us all to make sure that we're on track to finish the project on time. And that was part of her role as well. And that was super useful.
Perfect. There's another question. If there's a plan for the survey data to be openly available, how about that?
I don't think so. I guess, I mean, it's not like secret, but yeah, no, so there's no plan.
No plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And then there was one more question. If you were thinking about adding qualitative data with, for example, interviews in the project.
We did have 2 open-ended questions that were included in the survey. And what we ended up doing, because it's very hard to visualize qualitative and open-ended data like that, we ended up, because there was only 140 participants, and of those, I don't believe 100% answered the open-ended questions, we were able just to actually show all of the answers. So we just kind of formatted it for the nonprofit, and they can then read it through themselves. So we didn't have to grapple too much with how to present the data, because I think that can be trickier than with quantitative data, obviously. But although it wasn't an interview, it did provide a format for people to share some of their thoughts in a less structured way.
Okay. All right. I have another question for you. So was this your first CorrelAid project, or have you more experience? So Sylvi, you were the project lead in this project. Was this the first time being the lead, or was this your first project?
Project proper. So before that, I hadn't, yeah, I mean, I had like do projects, but.
Okay, cool. And for you, Theresa?
Yeah, it was actually my first project as well. And I forgot to mention, so I mean, I'm a bit newer to CorrelAid. I joined around this time last year at the first meetup we had in person last year. And that was I had known about the organization for a while, but this was my push to really start getting involved. And then the project came up afterwards and I applied for it. So this was my first project after joining and becoming part of the local Berlin chapter.
Ah, okay, perfect. Well,
yeah.
Okay, I don't know. Are there more questions from the chat, from people here? Yeah, one more question regarding the survey. How would you justify that the people who took the survey were representative, generalized enough? Sylvi, what do you say? Or Theresa, if you want to go ahead.
I mean, I would say we didn't say that, and we were very clear not to say that. And I think the nonprofit as well, that we were all aware of the limitations of the survey, particularly because it happened in the midst of this pandemic, where it was harder to actually see people face to face and do the survey as they intended. So the nonprofit was aware of this, but we also made sure in our results and in our report that we were very clear that this wasn't going to be as representative as maybe people hoped. Nonetheless, there's still, I think, important or helpful takeaways that you could learn, as long as you're aware of its limitations. Sylvia, I don't know if there's anything
No, that's exactly, yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if we have maybe some more NPO representatives in the audience, but how much time does this NPO had to invest for this project? Like, how regular was your communication with the NPO? Did you have one person you talked to or more, or how does that work?
So we had one person, and that was also great. Nice to have one person to talk to, because yeah, it's kind of good to have like a one-on-one. And I don't think there was much actually. So it was good to talk actually. So we did exchange a couple of emails, but it's good to also like just call. But I think like in terms of time, it wasn't a big investment. So I mean, there's like time where we do stuff, but then they don't really need to do much. So I guess we had kind of a couple of longer calls, like maximum an hour at the beginning, like 1, 2, maximum 3. And then we did like drafts of and suggestions, and then our contact person, she kind of went over these, gave another suggestion, and they internally discussed it as well. So that was good for us, that they kind of did their discussion, and then she would just give us the feedback, the consolidated feedback. And that kind of went back and forth a couple of times. And then at some point, the survey was ready and it went live. And so she also, like the contact person of the NGO, she distributed the survey. So she had kind of an email list, basically. So these were mostly contacts that they had somehow, and then contacts from contacts. But then the survey was live, and that's like a time where we can't really do much.
Yeah.
And we had like an analysis time where we had consulted her before a little bit on like what should we prioritize, what would be, or we kind of suggested this would be our plan. Do you think this will be like a good outline for the report that would be useful for you? And yeah, so. But that was very short. That was actually just an email, I think. And then in the end, we had like a little bit of a talk, kind of evaluating so what they'll do with the results. And I hope that that's a discussion that will continue on. So it's, yeah.
Okay, cool. And on the volunteer side, like how much time did you invest? You said it's over the course of 5 months, I believe, right? And so Theresa, I don't know, how much time did you invest for this project?
Yeah, I would say not, I mean, it went through phases. So because of the structure of the project, so towards the beginning, when it was a lot of discussions about with the nonprofit about what their needs were and how to best design the survey, that's where Sylvi and another one of our teammates were more actively involved, and myself and the other analysts didn't do as much because we had no data yet. So it wasn't until really the tail end of the project, once we actually got our data in, where we divided up the work and we kind of discussed who would be responsible for what, and then started to analyze the results. So for me, I mean, towards the beginning of the project, it was really more planning calls and onboarding calls that I participated in. And that was, say, maybe 1 or 2 hours every 2 or 3 weeks, maybe towards the beginning. And then once we were more actively analyzing the results, it was less than 5 hours a week. Averaged towards the end, we had like more of a marathon final session where we're really putting everything together, like very university style. And I think that's always the case with projects. So it was definitely manageable with, at the time I was studying. So with my studying and working and then doing this, I think it was very manageable. But that it goes in kind of waves, I think is good to understand.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Free just gave us like an overview of like the whole, how does a project work with CorrelAid, and she also mentions that like CorrelAid projects are also not a one-way street, so it should also be learning opportunities for the volunteers participating. So what was like your personal key learning that you took from the project? Maybe for next projects, maybe for your like personal life, or I don't know. Yeah, Sylvi, what was your key learning?
So one was something that Theresa also highlighted is like how easy and how seamlessly you can work in R and Python together. So that was just, that was really nice to see, because sometimes I don't know, sometimes you know how to do things in the other language easier than, or faster than in the other. And so it's really nice to kind of how that goes hand in hand. And I think if we hadn't had the situation that we're more or have different proficiency levels, I don't think I would have tried out this package. So that was really cool. Yeah, that's something I'm definitely taking away. Yeah.
And how about you, Theresa?
Yeah, no, I would agree that, and this idea that virtual environments are always super helpful. That's really good, because especially when maybe I'm just doing projects on my own for my own interests or for my portfolio or something, you don't really have to deal with these types of questions. And as soon as you are in a more collaborative project, especially in these cases where it's volunteer-based, and unlike maybe in a work environment or a professional environment, there you have an infrastructure and there are dedicated people to maintain that infrastructure for you to do your work. In this case, it's really, you have to create that infrastructure on your own. And that was something that we unfortunately didn't do, and it ended up working anyway. We just had to do some additional troubleshooting, but that's definitely a key takeaway for me moving forward, is to just always be very clean and good with your code, and to set up these virtual environments, to set up your requirements, and that way it's much easier when you are working collaboratively, no matter the size of the project or the type of analysis you're doing.
Okay, cool. So both of you would again do a CorrelAid project, yeah?
Definitely.
Do you already have any wishes, like how such a project should look like for you? Not really?
No, I mean, that's the good thing. You can also like try out new things, right? It's a good it's a good environment to try out new things with good support as well. So that was
yeah, sure. And I mean, it's also always like what the nonprofit needs, right? So that's actually the content of a project. And this brings me now to like the next topic on our agenda, because like only 1 more minute left, which will be Liam, also from your local chapter from Berlin, who will talk about like the data dialogue, a special event format where we meet NPOs and we bring them together with the data scientists to discuss data challenges from the NPOs. And maybe this will become a project at one point. So I thank you both very much for sharing the results of your project and your insights and experiences. If you have any last words, please say them, or just we see each other at the stage or later at this conference. All right.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good night. See you at the stage.
Bye-bye.
Bye.